All right, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for our October lunchtime webinar. How big is the equine obesity problem in the UK and what advice can be given? These free webinars are brought to you by the Animal Welfare Foundation, or AWF, and I'll just give you a brief introduction into what AWF do and how you can get involved before I introduce our speaker for today. My name's Alina and I work on the AWF events and grants, which I'll mention in a second. And we are the British Veterinary Association's charity. We're a science-led charity which supports the vet profession to champion animal welfare. And we achieve this through three main avenues. Firstly, we fund research on animal welfare issues and challenges. We provide a platform for debates. Oh, sorry, it's just gone to the Slido poll. Yeah, cool. If you could just stick on that one. We hold an annual conference, which is called the Discussion Forum, and that's an entire day dedicated to speaking about animal welfare challenges and opportunities for improvement. And thirdly, we have a lot of educational initiatives supporting the next generation of animal welfare advocates. And I'll just give you a little bit more information about our what sort of things we can offer for students, including things like this webinar. So you can apply for a research grant if you're an undergraduate student and you're interested in animal welfare. We've just opened our fundings, our research call for 2025 projects. So if you're interested, you can have a look at the website, and applications are due before the end of February next year. So you've still got lots of time. We run these webinars monthly at the moment, and you can also host one of these animal welfare talks at your university. That's an option. We've got lots of case studies on our website, which are various scenarios where you can explore ethics and welfare and take those into consideration when coming up with resolutions. So that can be really helpful for your studies. And as I mentioned before, we've got the annual discussion forum, which is great for students to attend. We really encourage students attending, and we tend to have heavily discounted tickets for students. We've just set our date for next year. So the discussion forum next year will be in London on the 19th of May. And yeah, we'll be sending out more information about that when tickets open and that sort of thing through our newsletter and social media. Please do sign up for our newsletter and keep in touch with us on social media. You can scan the QR code there to go to the website and do that. But yeah, we'll be able to give you lots more information about what the next webinar topics will be, and dates around research funding and that kind of thing. So very pleased to introduce you to your speaker today, Lucy Grieve. Lucy's a very experienced equine vet, and she currently works as a veterinary projects officer for the British Equine Veterinary Association. And we're very grateful to have Lucy with us today to talk about one of her passions, equine obesity. There will be a few polls in the presentation, and we use Slido. So when those polls appear on the screen, you can either scan the QR code with your phone and just pop your answer to the question in, or you can type into a web browser, slido.com, and pop in the code that you'll see on the screen also. But all the details will be there in front of you, and it'd be great if you can get involved with those. Also, with questions, you can either put your questions in Slido. When you start putting in answers for the polls, you'll notice that there's a questions tab. So yeah, feel free to put any questions in there, and Lucy will answer those at the end. You can also put any questions you have in the chat in Teams. So yeah, please do ask questions. And I'll hand over to Lucy. Thank you.
Thank you, Alina, and thanks for coming, everyone. So today we're going to be talking about equine obesity in the UK and what we can do about it. So first of all, I'd like to start with a couple of questions for you to answer. So as Alina said, if you want to scan the QR code or go to the Slido website and put in that code, you'll be able to join in the polls. So my first question is, what percentage of the horses you see are overweight? And that's, let's exclude racehorses, okay? Because we know they're unlikely to be overweight due to the nature of what they do. And so think about all the other horses you see, sports horses, pleasure horses, you know, retired, all that sort of thing. And let's get a little idea of what you guys feel you see out there. So that's quite interesting. So there's quite a lot saying sort of 25 to 50%. Not many saying that they see less than 25%. So that's kind of what we'd expect, I suppose. Okay, and then I've got one more question for you, which is, what do you think is the biggest cause of equine obesity in the UK? So do you think it's owner ignorance? They just don't know, they don't understand, or is it owner denial? So they probably know the horse is overweight, but they just don't want to sort of confront that. Or is it lack of suitable environment? So in this country, you know, the grazing, premises set up, livery yards, etc., make it really difficult to manage those horses. Is it lack of exercise? These horses aren't doing as much as they need to. Or genes, breed, that kind of thing. So see what you think is the biggest cause. Okay, so again, that's quite interesting. So owner denial, yeah, which is kind of what people have found in all their studies and in the research. Obviously, it's likely to be a combination of all these things, but in terms of the biggest sort of stumbling block, there's definitely a lot of owners out there who don't either understand or don't want to confront the issue, being it their own horse. Good. So a little bit of background. I think it's quite interesting just to look at obesity in general. And if we kind of concentrate on the mammals, really, because that's going to be most relevant to us. But obesity, we know, is a pan-species problem. Okay, so every species is potentially affected by obesity. It happens worldwide. We know from particularly humans, but other species as well, that there is thrifty genotypes. So there is definitely genes at play to do with obesity that will make certain individuals more prone to getting obese. We know there's what we call the obesogenic environment. So factors outside of that individual that influence their risk, if you like, of getting obese. And then we also know that with medical advancement, we've been able to manage obesity better, which means it kind of prolongs, I suppose you could say, in the populations. But also, you know, there's lots of medical advancement in other conditions, which means that we're seeing these kinds of problems more and more. And then we've got modern culture. So naturally, you know, food is available and it's seen as a good thing to be able to eat, because, you know, not being able to eat is seen as something that's, you know, something you're struggling with and not something that you're coping with in the long term. So food is going to be a big driver there, and the culture to eat and to be surrounded by, you know, obesogenic foods, if you like, is also massively at play here. So with humans, 1.9, this is back in 2019, by the way, so it's probably higher now, 1.9 billion human adults are overweight, 650 million are obese, and that's 13% of the world's adult population. So that's quite a staggering statistic there from the human side. We also know that there's a fourfold increase in global child and adolescent obesity from 1975 to 2016. So we know they've got a big problem there. And the child thing is definitely more relevant to us, because if you think about an adult being in control of their own food intake and exercise, with a child, it's much more like it is with a pet, so like a horse, where the parent or the owner is in control of those things. So it's an interesting thing to look at with the children obesity. And 41 million children under the age of 5 are overweight or obese. And that's quite a scary thing to think about, because, you know, we're only really just starting to understand the effects of obesity in the younger years of an individual's life and how that affects them throughout the rest of their health in their lifetime. And then 4 million people die each year due to obesity-related disease. So that, again, shows you the sort of severity, the danger of being obese, and also the impact that has on your lifespan, right? So moving on to pets. So pets in general, this is, so 22 to 44% of pets worldwide are considered to be obese. So again, this is due to the environment we put them in, what we feed them, how we control them, and also how we view what they should be looking like. But obesity is also, and I found this quite interesting, increasing amongst some domestic and wild animals who aren't overfed or under-exercised. So this is really just to try and describe that there are other factors here at play, okay? So it's not all just down to the simple eating too much, not doing enough exercise thing. There are definitely other factors involved, and we're only really just starting to understand those. But certainly the fact that we're seeing wild animals suffering from obesity makes you realize that it isn't just, influence coming from the direct factors from the owner, if you like, or the person in control that's resulting in this. So moving back to our equine obesity and focusing on that, why is the UK so obesogenic for horses? So we know that we've got a lot of breeds here in the UK, so different genetics, some of which are not probably suited to the environment that we've put them in. So that's going to be one major downfall for our horse population here. We also know that the microbiome is becoming much more relevant in this subject area. So the gut flora within the individual, and that applies to humans and other animals, but horses as much, influences how their body adapts, changes, and what phenotype, what sort of what they display externally. So what their body composition is and how well they maintain their fat or lose their fat. That's a lot of influence there coming from the microbiome in the gut. We know that the lifestyle that we put them in here is perhaps not as well suited to what they should be doing and what they were genetically evolved to do. We know that the diet here is very unnatural, if you like. So we think about horses grazing on grass all the time, but of course, what type of grasses are we talking about, and how is that grass sort of laid out, and the density and the nutritional value of it? We're not quite, probably as clued up on that as we should be. And then we've got the lack of understanding, I think, and this lack of control potentially, where people don't always necessarily know that the horse is obese, and they certainly don't always understand how they can control that. And sometimes these things can be out of an owner's control, like I said, with a livery yard, for instance, where they're really limited in what they can do. So it's kind of like the perfect storm, really, in this country for horses. Going back to a different species, talking about genetics specifically, there's quite a lot of work been done at Cambridge University on Labradors and other dogs, but they've proven that a quarter of Labradors, and we all know Labradors are famous for being food orientated and easily get overweight if they're fed too much and not exercised enough. But we know now that there is a genetic mutation in a quarter of Labradors that results in them being 2 kilos heavier than their counterparts. And the reason for this is that the genetic mutation causes a disruption in their leptin-melanocortin pathway. Now, leptin is a hormone that's in control of our appetite. Okay, so your appetite and your desire to eat is driven by a hormone. So these dogs, the quarter of Labradors with this mutation, actually have a drive to eat that is as strong as their drive for thirst. So they are not just greedy in the kind of comedy sort of sense of the word. They are genuinely hungry. They are constantly hungry, never really feeling satiated. They want to eat, and it's a really, really strong feeling within them. So that, I think, is a really good example of where we've got to consider the welfare implications, because if you've got an animal that is so desperately hungry because of some sort of genetic mutation and you're taking the food away or limiting the food, that has a welfare implication on those animals, right? So we probably need to think about that side of things as well, and consider, these animals, okay, it's all very well just putting them in starvation paddocks and things, but how are we affecting them sort of psychologically, mentally, their well-being? So I think thinking about the genetics is important, because if there was a way of sort of manipulating that, I suppose, if you want to say it, so breeding that gene away and out of the population, then you're not going to have those animals which are desperately craving food all the time, but unable to have that food because they're obese. So thinking about genetics is a very important thing when it comes to breeding and selection, right? Then human heritability has been proven as well for obesity. So 40 to potentially 75% of human obesity is actually proven to be like gene related or heritable. It's not the same type of mutation as they've seen in the Labrador. That's quite a rare mutation to find in humans. It is a cause of infant obesity, but there's a lot of other genes at play. And I think that's the key, isn't it? That it's so complex that we're never probably going to find all those genes that are responsible. But knowing that there are genes at play is a very important thing to remember when you're addressing these horses. So in the horse population, the genes we are probably quite familiar with, the sort of the breeds, right? So the cold-blooded breeds, the natives, they carry, we can probably, it's not sort of rocket science, it's kind of common sense. They carry genes that make them more sort of thrifty. They're more likely to store fat. They cope on less food. They don't seem to suffer as much as, say, a thoroughbred or a hot-blooded horse. And the warm bloods seem to have a sort of mixture of that going on in their genes. You get some warm bloods that are quite sort of thoroughbred-like in their sort of body composition, and they don't put weight on easily, but others do definitely, and carry that more sort of cold-blooded sort of line, I suppose. And the problem is we've also kind of been indiscriminately breeding, right? So for the whole time that we've been domesticating horses, we've been breeding them for the purpose that we wanted them to carry out. But then more recently, it's been more down to aesthetics or appearance or, what we kind of feel is a nice thing to look at or to ride. But we haven't been thinking about these sorts of things, like does it struggle to maintain its weight? Is it very prone to being overweight? Do we want to be breeding an animal that has that kind of genetic predisposition? So it might be that we have to think more about selective breeding, but in a good way, and breeding sort of for the characteristics or the genes or the phenotype that isn't so sort of struggling with the food and the weight problems. So revisiting that microbiome thing, this is quite a sort of exciting new field, which I'm sure you've all heard about. But basically, there's some really interesting studies done that show how this microbiome factor influences weight gain. Okay, so this study I found quite cool. So they took germ-free mice and they gave them the gut microbes from an obese human twin, they gained more weight than the mouse that received the microbes from the lean twin. So you'd have two human twins, take their microbiome, their gut flora, give it to the mice, and definitely the ones that received the obese humans' gut flora, they gained weight. Okay, so the gut flora are definitely having a huge influence there. Okay. And it might be that there's an impact there for things like irritable bowel syndrome, celiac disease, type 2 diabetes, and stuff like that's all being looked into quite carefully now with humans, that the microbiome could play a huge part in that. We also know that babies given antibiotics in the first 6 months of life have an increased risk of being overweight later in childhood. And more recently, you might have seen a study done in foals by Surrey University. Chris Proudman was the author of the paper, or one of the authors. They found that foals given antibiotics early on in life, it affects their microbiome, and therefore it then affects them later in life and their health. So it's very possible that things like that are probably influencing body weight later in life. So, and I should mention, obviously, we know antibiotics can act as growth promoters in farm animals. So, of course, this shouldn't really be a surprise, I suppose. So lifestyle, this is another cool study. Okay, so lifestyle plays an impact just on its own, okay, without anything else potentially changing. So they studied some yellow-bellied marmots in Colorado's Rocky Mountains between 1976 and 2008. And they found that these marmots were unexpectedly gaining weight, and they couldn't understand why. Now, these marmots have an 8th-month hibernation, but they were waking up a month earlier due to climate change. So the snow melts to the first frost is what they would determine their hibernation on. And because it was getting warmer, they started waking up a month earlier. This meant they had more time for feeding and fattening, and then they had an extra 0.3 kilo of body weight. However, the interesting thing is that then improved their survival and reproductive success. So it's an interesting balance there, isn't it? That they've gained this weight, and they've got this kind of genetic or evolutionary kind of advantage, and therefore that's likely to then be perpetuated. And that's probably something that's happened in humans as well over time, and maybe in those breeds of horses as well. But then climate change increases the frequency of the summer drought. So they're expecting to see the trend there to change. And I think that's really important to recognise that, there's so many factors at play. You can't always predict what one factor is going to do because of the others that are influenced. Another lifestyle thing is sleep debt. So sleep debt, light pollution, it's been shown in mice that those exposed to constant light have higher body mass indexes and blood glucose. So being constantly exposed to light, having false light, things like that can have an impact. And we know that's on mice, and it's likely to be true of humans, could be true of horses, of course. And then estrogen disrupting chemicals in the environment. So stuff in food cans, hard plastics, and thermal paper has been shown to also cause that problem. So when it comes to the horse, we have clearly removed them so far from what nature really intended, and particularly in the Western world and in our sort of culture, we really do, I suppose, mollycoddle them and dress them up in thick rugs and put them in nice warm stables, give them deep beds, give them all this incredible food. We don't sort of let them get too close to each other in fields and mess about and injure each other. They've basically got a sedentary, very easy life in this climate here in the UK, and they are looked after impeccably by their owners to the point where actually they are nothing, their environment and life is nothing like it should be for what their genes were intending. And then we've obviously changed their diet hugely, right? So this kind of supersized processed meal thing is possibly the equivalent of what we've done with our horses as well. The feeds that we produce, they're all top quality. There's high starch, high sugars, things like that in a lot of the hard feeds we give. A lot of the hay and the haylage is all super sort of high quality, again very nutritious. And those ingredients are tapping into the reward pathways all the time. And we know that from other species, and it's quite possibly true of horses as well. We obviously give huge portion sizes. We think that horses can't be without roughage, so we must give them ad lib hay, and they must be out at grass as much as possible, and all this kind of thing, which of course we know is true in certain cases, but what they're getting during that time might not need to be quite as nutritious and as high quality as we are providing. And that's that normalization is a big thing in the human sort of population. We think that this stuff is now normal, and the same will be for our horses, right? We think that bags of feed, hay, haylage, we feel like that is normal. Looking at green grass in a field, that is what we expect to see, and we think is normal for a horse and how it should be kept. And then all the snacks, we are undoubtedly, a population of snack givers. We do the same with our horses, constantly giving them little treats and snacks and things like that. And of course, it all adds up. Now, a lot of the grazing here in the UK is actually old cattle grazing. So it's very lush. The type of grass is used, the type of sort of soil that it's grown on is all very sort of high milk yield, cattle-worthy pasture a lot of the time. And so that sort of forage that we're giving them is actually really calorific. We then often top up with hard feeds because we feel like we should be feeding them. It's like almost a psychological sort of thing that we think we must give them buckets of food morning and night. And we give them good dental care, which of course I'm not suggesting we shouldn't, but those horses in the wild probably have to chew a lot and then maintain their teeth. Our horses, we're having to do that for them because they're not getting the roughage. And so getting that good dental care is fine, but it's actually then allowing them to get more out of their food than ever. So we have to consider that, they're getting every little calorie basically out of all the food we give them because their teeth are in good nick, which is good. But it's not because they've been grazing on all that roughage all year. It's because, we've been doing the rasping. And then we've also got rid of all their parasites, their GI parasites. So in the wild, there would be a degree of gastrointestinal parasite burden, which would take away some of that nutrition from their food and also challenge their body a little bit, which, we have probably evolved to need. I think even humans, we think, probably should have some parasites to challenge the immune system. Certainly, we've been removing them from horses for a long time now. And actually, the way we've been worming over the years historically meant that we were trying to get rid of all those parasites all the time. Whereas now we know there needs to be a refugia. There needs to be a small, low population of parasites in the horse's abdomen, certain parasites, not all of them, just to keep the horse kind of in a healthy state, as it were. That's what they've evolved to live with. And those parasites will probably have a kind of symbiotic relationship. They'll take some of the nutrition out of the food or out of the bloodstream, if you like. So there is an argument there that we've been doing it wrong all this time, but we hopefully will correct that with our new understanding. So then there comes this kind of understanding of what those factors are doing to us as horse owners, right? So we have to be aware of, I don't want to say in a bad way, but manipulative marketing. We're constantly bombarded by the desire to get a horse better quality food, be the person that's doing the best for our animal, buying it the nicest rugs, the thickest rugs, all that sort of stuff. But obviously there's a conflict of interest there because those companies are trying to sell a product, they're trying to make a money. So we're being kind of influenced by them all the time and being sort of told, if you like, subliminally, that we need to be doing these things for our horses. It's also worth noting that obesity research in the human field is tied to the food industry was 5 times more likely to find no association between sugar sweetened drinks and weight gain. So it's always worth being wary of research, seeing who's done it, seeing if there is any kind of influences there, because as you probably know, research can be made to appear to be different to what it possibly should be showing. And then I've picked up on this one, that the lifespan of an overweight dog is up to 2.5 years shorter. So over a course of a life of a dog, that's quite a big change, right? And we probably don't see that so much in the horses, but it's undoubtedly, if you think about laminitis, a definite shortener of lifespan once they get those kind of those issues that are associated with it. So the dangers of obesity in horses, how much do owners and us involved with horses and their management, how much do we really understand about the dangers? We know that there is a risk of laminitis, but do we understand all of those dangers and how sort of close to the wind that we're sailing all the time? Laminitis is often something that someone will say, you've never had it before, blah blah blah. But it's potentially always been there, just that tipping point for a long, long time without the owner realizing. Similarly, with things like respiratory disease and joints, carrying all that extra weight on the musculoskeletal system, until it goes wrong, often people say, oh no, he's always been fine. But that's because he's just always been on that tipping point, always close to succumbing. And it's the owners that need to really understand the appreciation of that need for control. So it's really easy to just go and give that extra bit of hay or give that little extra bit of feed or just put an extra bit of scoop of chaff in or something, because you feel like you want to do your best for the horse, but you're actually not doing your best by doing that. So exerting control over your kind of behaviours is a really hard thing, but a really important thing to do. And then we have that kind of sense of apathy amongst a lot of people where they just feel like either it's not important or they can't do anything to change it. So they kind of give up and just carry on doing what they've always done. And then you also have those people that are just resistant to change. They don't believe that anything should change in the way they do what they do. They've always done it that way and that's what they'll keep doing. So that kind of trying to get people to change their behaviors is a huge, huge challenge. And naturally, there's some suspicion towards veterinary involvement. So, as a vet, when I'd go and see people, it really depended how you approached the subject, but equally, just certain individuals would just bring down the shutters. They didn't want to talk about it with you specifically, and they felt you're kind of trying to create a problem where there maybe wasn't one yet anyway. Whereas maybe if others, I don't know, farriers, saddlers, riding instructors, those kinds of people, yard managers, if they heard it from them, sometimes they were more able to absorb that information because they weren't quite so sort of guarded as they are sometimes towards vets. Nurses may play a very useful role in that, of course, and that's something that we're looking into very much. So control. So whose responsibility is it? And I think this is a really, really sort of hard thing that we have to be quite black and white about. Ultimately, as a horse owner, you are responsible for your horse's well-being and how much they're fed, how much they're exercised and what they look like. And there's got to be that accountability there. So we have to be kind of clear, strict, this is your bag, this is your sort of, your job to look after this horse and, be supportive and try and help them, but they've got to try and take responsibility and be accountable. And therefore, to be accountable, maybe have someone there helping them along the way that will hold them that accountability. There is, of course, naturally, the horse has to eat less. Largely, most horses are fed too much, but it's probably sort of changing what they're eating rather than eating less or less hours per day, because we know they need that forage. But they also probably need to exercise more. There is a lot to be said if you look at the kind of average leisure horse. They don't do that much exercise, and they certainly don't do much intensive exercise. So it's trying to work out ways to get around those problems. And then improving that satiety. So horses need to have a full kind of stomach and gut system, which is why the roughage is what they really need. And so keeping that roughage there without giving too much nutritional value is another sort of key to it all. And there's lots of things out on the market now for helping keeping them fed without them sort of getting too much in one go. So lots of foraging kind of cubes and equipment, puzzle feeders, trickle nets, things like that. Now, I know there's downsides to a lot of those things. They can cause sort of frustration for some horses, or some horses really wear the front of their teeth out on the trickle net. So, I'm not saying there's a perfect solution for any of this, but they're worth trying, and there are ways around some of those problems for those individuals that have them. And it's not a moral failing in owners or all of their animals, right? So the animals can't be blamed for constantly banging the door and asking for more food. But neither, I think, should we be going around sort of pointing fingers and witch hunting owners. It's a really hard thing to do. And if any of you have owned a horse that's obese, it's a huge challenge trying to get that horse's weight back under control. We shouldn't, I think, poo-poo that and ignore the fact that those owners, while they may not have embarked on the journey yet, they are potentially going to find it hard. So we shouldn't be sort of accusing anyone of doing wrong. We should be trying to help them do right. And that's a really important thing to remember. So these genetic drives that mean that, they're hungry all the time, that variability in dogs is hardwired, right? So you can't get rid of it. And certainly it's possible that's the same for horses. So those horses that are always asking for food, craving food, they're probably always going to do that no matter how much you feed them. Okay, so that's worth knowing in a good way, because you won't be able to change it. So you've got to learn to live with it. But equally, it's worth recognizing it doesn't mean that you're not doing the right thing, or you're not getting success just because that animal's still constantly hungry and asking for food. Many owners don't recognise that the animal's obese, and this is reflected in human with parents of obese children. They don't recognise that their child is overweight. So that in itself is a big issue and needs careful management when you first broach these subjects, because it can be really, really hostile and really hard for them to hear. So how you say it and communicate it is really important. And there's obviously like a socioeconomic status thing, that we know that from humans, but probably affects horses as well, right? So someone that's, in a livery yard that's very, can't be altered in any way, the grazing is very fixed or whatever, or the routine and the management's very fixed, that's going to be really hard for them to change. Whereas somebody that's got much more freedom or free will over their animal, maybe has their own yard or something, then they're potentially going to be able to do a lot more within their capability, or even have staff or other people to help them. And access to fitness resources. And for humans, obviously, that's things like gyms and outdoor space. But for horses, are they in an environment where there's lots of hacking to be had, or are they in a sort of urban environment where they can only go in the school? So there's those kind of factors at play, which we can extrapolate from research in humans and such like. But it's very easy to see how that works for horses too. And so those husbandry lifestyles are a big sort of issue here in the UK particularly. And livery yards are quite often fixed and full and hard to come by. You've got sort of geographical restriction, parts of the country are how they are, and you can't change that. The value of land here is obviously high. So trying to, change how you graze the land, how you use the land, can be quite tricky, because obviously there's a lot of people invested in that small parcel of land, if you like. So it's got to be a kind of group change, and a big investment's often needed to try and make those changes. And that can be quite costly on the outlay. So the role of the vet, I just want to kind of discuss a little bit about my experiences really, and how I think that our profession can help, and maybe that can make other people think about how their own professions and interactions can also impact owners and these horses. So vets, I think, we hope that we can bring expertise, but I'm not going to sugar the pill. There's lots of vets out there who probably aren't particularly interested in obesity and the ways to fix it, and so haven't maybe kept up with that information, or aren't particularly personally swayed by it. So finding a vet, I think that understands and is passionate about this stuff is quite important. How they communicate is really important, and that's an individual thing, obviously. And that education process, so not only their own education, but how they educate owners is a really sort of valuable resource and a valuable skill to have. and knowing when to intervene and how to create solutions for those individuals. So, intervention ideally comes before the laminitis, before the problems start, but that can be difficult because those people often don't want to either open a can of worms or the Pandora's box, or they're just burying their head in the sand. So how you kind of get those people to recognize that intervention is needed is quite a challenge. And the solutions, are never going to be easy. So there's always going to be that need to kind of roll with it a bit, try different things, see how you get on. If it doesn't work, don't give up, try something else. It's a long-term, sort of long game, I suppose, trying to help these animals. So bearing that in mind, you need to build up a relationship with that owner and work with them. So it's no good criticizing, owners if our own camp isn't in order. And as I said, vets aren't perfect as a whole. So there's lots of vets out there that won't do, the work that needs to be done with these cases and turn a blind eye probably quite often because it's just easier just to, do the vaccine and walk off again. But, the field of obesity research amongst horses is growing rapidly, and we are understanding lots and lots more all the time. And there's much more familiarity now with the diagnostic testing. So we know we can test for insulin, increased insulin or glucose, to be able to tell whether these horses are at a point where they're struggling with their obesity and entering into that hyperinsulinemia stage. So they're getting high insulin and then they're massively at risk of laminitis. And then also there's more medical interventions now. So medication is available that can help get that insulin down, get rid of that glucose, take that horse out of that red zone for laminitis. But then that's not going to fix the obesity, is it? So then we need to medicate them for a period whilst that obesity is getting under control, which could take months or even years potentially. But, there's at least medication out there now which can help with that, which has been a massive step forward. And then that direct experience of case management. Not everyone has maybe dealt with obesity themselves, so they don't know how hard it is. But if you have had that experience or you've lived it and learned it with owners, then you understand the challenges that they face, and then you can better support them and help them manage that horse. So like I mentioned, that kind of communication side, broaching the subject can be quite hard. And like I say, whether the horse has just come down with laminitis and everyone's in a very anxious, state of emergency, and obviously no one wants to talk about the cause at that point either because they're too stressed about what's going on, or you're coming up against a case where you can see that this is a ticking time bomb, but the owner's not wanting to talk about it. Those are really difficult, situations that I found myself in as a vet, and learning how to negotiate those or navigate those problems with owners it's hard, but you have to get to know those owners, I suppose. And there's some that you'll be able to work with and some you won't, that's human nature. But trying to get onto the subject and talk about it in a comfortable, non sort of confrontational way is important. And when they are resistant to talking about it or confronting it, then of course you may have to get a bit more, a bit more sort of scare tacticy, talk about the laminitis case you've seen, or say that you've just had to put a horse down because of these same problems, and see if it kind of gives them a bit of a wake up. But obviously try not to do that unless you have to. And then providing that support ongoing. They might need to check, you might need to change the way you approach these things with these owners as well. They might sort of listen to you for a month or two and then get really disheartened by the lack of progress and then switch off. So you might have to kind of change your approach. But do keep going. And certainly if you're in a team of people working with that owner and that horse, whether it's the farrier or the yard manager or the instructor, try and make sure you keep in touch and keep that case continuity going. So you keep plugging away and helping them. Now, there's lots of stuff out there in terms of awareness. Obesity's hit the headlines for several years now and been a big thing of discussion, particularly around show horses. Every time there's something about Horse of the Year show champion, the obesity factor comes up about the show horses, and helping owners identify it and helping others, paraprofessionals, people working with horses, helping them identify these obese horses as well is really important so that we all sing from the same hymn sheet. And then again, just understanding those causative factors. Don't just broad brush the horse or the owner with the usual common problems. Think about all the complexity of problems that could be at play there. And then you can hopefully come up with more realistic changes that will have an effect and help that owner in terms of getting some success. And then monitoring that progress and not just leaving them to it is really, really important. When it comes to recognizing obesity, you're probably all familiar with the kind of body condition scoring. There's all sorts of ways you can weigh them on weigh bridges, but I think there's no sort of perfect golden bullet for this. I think genuinely you need to ideally use all of these things if you can. A weigh bridge is great for looking at that kind of critical mass and how much they're weighing over time. But sort of feeling them, getting your hands on, seeing the horse as it moves, where the fats and where the muscles are, that's really important and actually quite a skill. So I think, if you can learn that, if you don't already have it, then that's really, really valuable. And then you'll get much slicker and quicker at doing these things. And then it's a case of kind of assessing their current management, their current diet, identifying what things might be causing problems and how you can change them. And then seeing what impact those changes have had over time. It might take weeks, months, maybe a year before you see any change. Sometimes you have to go through the whole year of seasons before you'll get that real change, but hopefully you're going in the right direction. And then just keep revisiting it, keep looking at those dietary changes repeatedly. So in terms of solutions, there's a fabulous document out there done by Tamsin Furtado and her team at the University of Liverpool. Some of you might have already come across it, called When the Grass is Greener. And this is a fabulous sort of, you can print it out, it's a PDF. It's kind of got a really good holistic approach to this stuff. And it really demonstrates how solutions for obesity need to be bespoke, they need to be tailored, and they need to be really specific. So the owner needs to have really specific instructions about what to change. But ultimately, the kind of, if I want to simplify it, the 5 areas are eliminating hard feeds and putting them on a low calorie balancer, so they're getting those vitamins, minerals, and essential proteins. Changing their roughage, whether that's hay, haylage, straw, and how it's being fed. Looking at the grazing and how you can control that better. Trying to get the exercise maximized and getting rid of rugs. Just having a thin rain sheet. Even if the horse is being clipped in the winter, just having a thin rain sheet is often plenty for these horses. They've got a giant furnace basically inside their abdomen that creates heat, so they don't need help staying warm quite often. So that's always worth remembering. And then, is that just a partial solution? Yes, probably. I don't doubt, and I know from my own experience that there are animals out there that seem to be weight loss resistant no matter what you do. They really are living on fresh air, as the owners often say. But, maybe that is because these are the ones that have got this sort of genetic issue. There's something going on, the microbiomes at play, and all those other factors you're trying to control aren't having as much of a desired effect as you would hope. And, the human research is showing that, things like body mass index and stuff is only partially useful. There's a lot more going on, and there's a lot more approaches being developed that are more integrative with things like assessing the metabolic parameters and stuff. So, yes, we have to look at the research being done elsewhere, I think, and probably take something home from that and learn from it. But ultimately, you try to capture as many of those obese horses with the usual management strategies, and you probably will. If you're sticking to it, but there will always be those, I think, individuals or outliers that don't necessarily have the desired response, but don't lose hope. So in summary, basically, essentially we've got to diagnose, if you like, the cause of the obesity. You've got to work out why this horse is obese. And obviously that's why prevention is better than cure, because if you can avoid them getting obese in the first place, and you haven't got to tackle that huge sort of insurmountable weight loss sort of period. Whereas, if they're already obese, you've got to do that. You've got to try and get that weight loss affected. And making that sort of treatment, if you like, that kind of program tailored to the horse, the owner, what's achievable. Don't give them, instructions to change things that they can't change. That's pointless, and that's just going to dishearten them. Work with them on the things that they can change. And then reviewing that. And that means, going back and chatting to them every, month or so, even if it's just a quick phone call, WhatsApp, whatever, how's it going? Are you seeing any change? Pictures sometimes can be helpful, although not as helpful as you'd hope. And just making sure, even if it's every vaccine or dental check, when the saddler comes out, if you're all, singing from the same hymn sheet, then that person does get quite a lot of interaction over the year, at least, even if they're not calling you out specifically. So I think that's important to try and get that sort of every point in the horse's calendar, getting it assessed and seeing how things are going. And then, as I say, just providing support for that owner, making sure that they are not alone, because it can be really tough, not just, in terms of the actual physical work they have to, do to create this change, but also like people influencing them on the yard. the horse next door, their owner saying, oh, you know, you're not feeding it enough, you're starving it. And, you know, they'll get all those comments when they can't believe you're not putting a rug on today and all those sorts of things. So they're kind of going to be coming up against quite a lot of sort of backlash, I suppose, against what they're doing. So providing them with that support, which might be written report saying this is what you've got to do, that might just give them the confidence to do it and to show that to the yard manager if they start getting criticised. So I just wanted to apologise to all the overweight animals I failed in the past, because it's been a learning curve for me, and I certainly didn't understand and comprehend all this when I started out as a new graduate for many years. So I think it's important to recognise that it's not too late to start learning it, as horse owners, as any sort of member of the industry, really. And that the more we kind of get on board with all of this, hopefully the more impact we'll have, and the better things we'll get for these horses. So before I finish, just another couple of poll questions, which is really just to see, you know, what action can we all take which would be most effective? This is to ask you guys what you think would have the most impact. So is that just that we talk about it more openly in the public forum? Do we need to be incentivizing these owners more? You know, there's way to win kind of initiatives, biggest loser competitions. Should we be actually prosecuting people more? You know, we prosecute owners for having a thin horse, right? Well, an obese horse is actually as bad for welfare as a thin horse is. So should we be prosecuting owners for sort of cruelty, neglect? And you may know that there's been a couple of cases that have sort of set that precedent in recent years where it has happened. So it might be that becomes more of a thing. And then should we ban products which encourage weight gain or prevent weight loss? You know, should we be removing those products from the shelves, but therefore also removing it potentially from those horses and owners that need those weight gain products, of course, because some horses will. So tell me what you think. So it's looking like it's talking about it more, which I think, yeah, I think I agree with that. I think that's going to be the most impactful thing we can do, is probably just to be more upfront about it, talk about it. Let's just get it out in the open and make it a normal thing. I think if every time I saw a horse as a visiting vet, if I was just in that position to talk about its weight every time, that would often help break down those barriers and help that kind of seed the thought in the owner's mind. And just a second one, which is going to be a word cloud. So if you can try and just put in single words, or one or two words ideally, because anything longer than that makes it tricky. What will you do going forwards in your careers in the equestrian industry? What will you do to try and tackle equine obesity yourself? And I think this might need a little bit of thought, but it'd be interesting to see what comes up. Keep updated. I like it. That's good. Research, yeah. Educate, yeah. This is all good. Learn to fat score, understand it, talk. Raise awareness from the welfare view. Yeah, brilliant. I think that's the point. I think we need to talk about it more than just an aesthetics thing. It's more than just the laminitis, which of course is the biggest problem, but it's a welfare problem. It really is a massive welfare problem. It's the elephant in the room, I think, in this country for sure, if not others. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, Alida, back over to you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Lucy. That was great. Very informative. A lot of information. And we have some questions. Firstly, so there's one on Slido, which is asking, does obesity in horses impact their welfare in ways other than poor health? So maybe more behaviorally, socially, other measures of welfare impact.
I think that's a really good question, and it's something we do not know, as far as I'm aware anyway. I mean, it's hard to measure, right? Horse welfare, horse well-being is a really hot topic in terms of how do we measure it? How do we know if that horse is happy, sad, whatever? Emotions are obviously in itself difficult to ascribe, but without anthropomorphizing anyway. But we certainly, you know, we know that obesity, like proper obesity, is going to make that horse probably feel less able to do things. I guess, you know, this is totally my personal opinion. You know, I've certainly known overweight horses that have been grumpy. And, you know, owners have gone down that, oh, I think he's got ulcers. Oh, I must have to feed him more, you know, vicious circle, all those things. And then obviously they're locking the horse up because it's too fat. So they're not turning it out as much, or, you know, it's grumpy when it's ridden. So maybe because it's uncomfortable, and therefore they're not doing as much with it ridden. So I think there's a lot of that going on. And certainly some of those horses, when they've lost weight, have been happier horses. Now, whether that's because they feel better physically, I don't know about mentally and emotionally, you know, we don't know whether they're aware of them being themselves being overweight, but maybe because of that and their management changing, you know, they're doing more work, they're less uncomfortable when they're working, they maybe get to go out for longer, you know, all these other things. They might get more hay once they're back down to a normal weight, things like that. I suspect that for a horse is a better situation to be in, right? So I don't think they know that they're overweight, but I think they probably feel the same problems, and possibly the same problems that humans do. We know that that fat tissue is an inflammatory mediator creator. Yeah, so it's like a poisonous gland. Actually, that's really the best way to describe it. Fat tissue is like a poisonous gland that lives in the body, secreting bad mediators, and they're inflammatory. They affect your insulin, all those things, right? Those probably make people, including horses, feel like crap. You know, if you've got a lot of inflammatory mediators going around your body chronically, we know that makes them feel bad. Humans report, you know, they get mental side effects, things like that, you know, trouble with their mental health. It's not just related to their appearance, it's related to the issues going on because of the fat tissue. So I don't think we should rule out that happens in horses. You know, it's entirely possible that they feel all those negative impacts of being, you know, overweight, having too much fat tissue. So until we have the proof, we don't know. But I think it's easy to extrapolate these things from the research in humans and other mammals.
Yeah, I guess future research opportunity.
Definitely.
And we've got a couple of questions about vets. One is, why do owners tend to be more guarded around vets compared to other professionals, like you mentioned, nurses and farriers? Yeah.
Yeah, again, we don't know, but I think we can probably guess. Vets are largely seen when things aren't going well, and we're often breaking bad news, and then we're also, you know, taking money in return for that. You know, we're running businesses, providing a service. Whereas I'd say farriers, you know, they come every 6 to 8 weeks. You know, you see them routinely. Okay, they might be there when things go wrong, but they're not kind of associated with bad stuff. And I think a lot of people are probably just a bit suspicious of vets. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on in the news about, you know, corporatization and price hiking and people taking, you know, lots of money off owners and running up bills. You know, cost of medical care in general is going up all the time. So veterinary costs are equally going up. So I think it's just a little bit of that. I think probably when they chat to nurses, for instance, you know, they're not seen as the kind of owners of the practice or the people in charge of the practice or the ones billing them potentially. So maybe that kind of like emotional side is much more like relaxed with a nurse. And to be fair, maybe just nurses and people are maybe better at communicating than some vets are. You know, some vets are great vets, great scientists, great practitioners, but they might not have the best communication or bedside manner skills. So I think it's just horses for courses. And I think some owners just feel more at ease with certain individuals. I mean, there's definitely lots of good vets out there who are very good at this stuff, so I'm not doubting that it's possible, but I just think, yeah, the dynamic there, whether it's the money, whether it's the, you know, the bad news provider, whether it's, you know, I haven't seen you all year and now you're coming telling me my horse is fat because, you know, I only asked you to come to do a vaccine. That's maybe not seen as the most kind of welcomed way to approach it, whereas yeah, maybe others can seed stuff more easily if they're coming every few weeks and doing physio or farriery, or, you know, it's maybe seen as less kind of confrontational. But I think it is probably just a communication thing that we all need to just maybe be a bit more understanding of.
Absolutely. And following on from that, there's a question asking whether you would say most equine vets recognize the importance of preventing obesity or managing obesity. Is it something that most equine vets would, bring up?
I mean, that's what I want. I want all vets to be bringing this stuff up and talking about it. And like I say, at every opportunity, you know, it relates to so much of the horse's holistic health and welfare that we should be all be talking about it. But I know personally when I started on this kind of crusade, really, when I started a beaver on the presidential tree, I spoke to people in my own practice, you know, and I asked them, if you go and see a horse for a vaccine and it's really fat, do you actually say anything, or do you just vaccinate the horse and walk away? Loads of them just went, just do the vaccine and go, you know. They're tired, they're late for their next appointment, there's been traffic, you know, the owner's in a rush. It's kind of like, I think that it's just the kind of nature of the beast in the world we live in, that we just don't bother going down any sort of tricky pathways if we don't have to. But interestingly, the more I spoke to them over the years that all this stuff was coming out and we were getting articles published and, you know, doing awareness campaigns, those people actually started saying to me, I've started talking to owners about this. And it's, you know, they were, I think, pleasantly surprised at how easy it was with the majority of owners. Most of them actually took it really well, were really keen to understand and talk about it and learn. You know, it was a minority that actually were putting their hands up saying, no, thank you very much, I don't want to talk about this, or I don't believe you. So I think that was really positive from us and for a profession, that actually we had more impact and ability to help than we realised. And actually, once you try something, you realise it's not as bad as you thought it might be. So, but you know, you're never going to get everyone. I'd still come up against owners that were absolutely not going to talk about this, or going to listen to me, or willing to even consider that their horse might be a fraction overweight. They were a minority, but they were there, you know, like, so you're not going to get everybody, but you can probably still help, you know, large majority of your clients just by bringing it up and making it routine. Then you're not picking on people. Do you know what I mean? If I just did it every time with every horse, then that's just my routine. It's my spiel, you know, as I do a vaccine. So I think doing that as a habit really helped. And then people saw on yards, I wasn't picking on people, I was doing it with everyone. So that's probably a good tactic that I learned.
Yeah, just creating that awareness.
Mm.
And we've got a couple of questions about supplements. Is it possible that supplements, in particular the bespoke options, contain a high caloric energy content?
I don't know much about supplements. I'm going to confess, there's certain ones that I would always advocate for, you know, things like really good quality biotin for hooves, or you know, where the horse had a vitamin deficiency, but, you know, a proven one, then things like that, supplements might be helpful. But I don't think it's easy to know. And the trouble with supplements is that they are not regulated. So unlike producing a medicine, where the medicine has to be licensed and has to pass, you know, tons of testing and prove its worth, and has to be what it says on the tin, that doesn't apply to supplements. So any one of you could set up a supplement company, pour out a chalk and a random mixture of whatever you felt like into some tubs and label it and sell it on the internet. So that for me is a real concern, because then how on earth do you know who's producing what? And just going to a big name, a big, you know, supplier, manufacturer, whatever, you'd think maybe would be reliable. But I don't know if that's even going to, you know, be completely reliable. So, you know, there's no testing done. There's nothing done on those ingredients. I don't think you can be sure what impact you're having. So my advice was always, don't give a supplement unless you know what you're doing it for and what you're dealing with. And therefore, you know, there might be a better way to tackle that. Do you know what I mean? So I think just giving supplements for the sake of it is a bit of a concern, because I think, yeah, you don't know what's in there. And certainly some of those, some of the supplements are, I think, sweetened to make them palatable. So I'd be really wary of those for sure. Like some of those liquid type things. I don't know if that's actually a name or a brand, whatever, but, you know, like the kind of molasses stuff. You know, I'd see that in a really fat lamanitic pony stable to keep it busy while it's on box rest. You're like, that's full of molasses and sugar. Like, that's the worst thing you could be doing for this pony. Because it's a supplement, you know, it said on it, breathe easy or something, you know, it's sort of for respiratory health or something. The owner didn't occur to them that was going to be a problem, because they assume that's for its respiratory function, the way it's marketed, right? So I think probably I cut everything out. I go back to basics, like a low calorie balancer, from like an actual balancer from a food, you know, manufacturer, the pelleted type stuff, that where it's got the vitamins and amino acids and like high protein, high quality protein in, and minerals, that I would feed as a minimum for every horse, because, you know, then whatever roughage and stuff you're giving them, whatever restriction or grazing you're having to do, they're getting that essential stuff. But I wouldn't be giving them any of the sort of other vitamin minerally stuff that hasn't got the proteins and amino acids in. So you've got to really look carefully at what you're giving. And if you're in any doubt, speak to a independent nutritionists. You know, there are some around there. Try and speak to them, and maybe speak to a couple so you get a bit of an idea of what the sort of consensus is. But I wouldn't just be buying random supplements, because I think there probably are things in there, but particularly bulkers, right? They put in lots of things to bulk up the powder. You don't know what that is, do you? And it's not necessarily written on the ingredients label because it's not regulated, so they don't have to put it on there. That would be my long answer.
A follow-up question was that whether some of these supplements could potentially be altering the microbiome and maybe contributing to gastric ulcers. So it sounds like you've...
Yeah, I think the microbiome thing is just like, wow. It's like we've discovered another universe. Like literally, there's something going on there with the microbiome that we've been totally oblivious to, which is kind of weird, isn't it? But I think we're going to, you know, maybe in another 10, 20, 30 years, who knows how long, but we're going to understand the impact of that stuff. And absolutely everything you feed your horse is affecting its microbiome. Even every sort of stress incident is going to affect microbiome potentially, you know, like all sorts of management things are going to impact that. And if that's having such a big, like, you know, impacting factor on the horse's health and its weight and all these other things, that's quite scary, you know. Like I definitely would be doing the, you know, less rather than more in terms of dietary things, because I think you don't know what those things that you give in those supplements are going to do to the microbiome for sure. You know, it's potentially really concerning. I think keeping to very natural, basic feeding kind of principles, like I say, straw, hay, haylage, you know, but all kind of like reliably sourced, nice grazing. I don't mean good quality grazing necessarily, but, you know, nice clean grazing and a low calorie balancer is probably all I'd want going through past my horse's lips, you know, that kind of stuff.
Beautiful. Great. Well, I think, yeah, we've got through all the questions and we're at the end of the hour. So just a huge thank you, Lucy. That was, it was really interesting just to get more insight into how obesity is happening and also the impacts, both welfare and health on the horses by being obese. So yeah, very, very interesting, really insightful. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for coming. We will send out an email with a link to the video in case you have colleagues that weren't able to make it today. And yes, thank you so much. Keep in touch with AWF and we'll see you at the next webinar.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Take care.